It is true, I almost didn't get here tonight. And I thank those good people at that table who processed the passengers, because this is one passenger who's deeply indebted to you right now. I had to testify this afternoon on a treaty, the treaty to eliminate the convention to eliminate discrimination and violence against women in all of its forms. And the caucus of the Democratic Party went quite long, and the meeting was getting more and more postponed, and the calls were going feverishly up to Boston saying, I don't know. But fortunately, I did manage both to testify, and I must tell you, CEDAW, as it's commonly known, the Women's Treaty, it's been 30 years since it's been introduced, and the United States stands alone with Iran, Sudan, and Somalia. It's not having ratified it. So it's about time, and I don't know if it will be many years more, but we need to do something about that. I want to congratulate WorldBoston for all of its good works as you climb to that momentous milestone of 50 years, and everybody celebrates in high fashion next year. I want to applaud your extraordinary contributions to global understanding, for your work as part of the National Council for International Visitors, and for the extraordinary partnership we at the State Department have with you here, because of the work that you do as being such a really leading private sector partner engaged in bringing together the kinds of delegations here tonight. The distinguished group from Pakistan, which I had an opportunity to speak with earlier, chancellors of universities from all over Pakistan, and then the Ukrainian delegation of technology experts. And I didn't meet the Ukrainians before dinner, but as the granddaughter of Ukrainian immigrants from both sides, I am really eager to welcome all of you as well. So I just want to thank you here at WorldBoston for the extraordinary work you do in exchanging best practices, taking your guests from all over the world to some of the most distinguished places here in the region, so that these lessons without borders can be transmitted in ways that create even better relations among nations. And I think in many ways these programs are as important today, if not more important, than at any time in the past. Since I am here as the Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, I want to speak a little bit about women in foreign policy, if you'll indulge me. I also want to say before I do that it's been an honor to get to know John some this evening, and to thank him for all of the extraordinary work he's done, and to learn that, as it always is the case, we all have much more in common than separates us. Today there is a growing recognition that women's empowerment must be central to any effort to solve our global pressing challenges, because it remains a simple fact that no country can get ahead if it leaves half of its people behind. And we can no longer relegate this global economic, political, and social imperative to the category of women's concerns. You know, those nice projects on the side, those soft issues, good to work on, but there's so many other pressing things we must address first. These are among the hardest issues, and issues that are absolutely essential to incorporate if we're going to be able to address the challenges that confront us. Secretary Clinton succinctly described the stakes when she said, "Until women around the world are accorded their rights and afforded the opportunity to participate fully in the economic, political, and social spheres of their lives, global progress and prosperity will have its own glass ceiling." When the potential that women represent around the world remains untapped, we not only shortchange them, but we shortchange our world of the talents that it so desperately needs. So the United States is making women's issues a cornerstone of our foreign policy because we recognize that today we can't possibly tackle the challenges that we confront, whether they have to do with security, economics, governance, and the environment, and so much more, unless women are participating at all levels. The creation of my position underscores just that, and its practical implication means that we are incorporating these issues in all of the work of the State Department, which covers all of the parts of the world, broken up as they are into bureaus, functional offices having to do with economics and human trafficking and so much more, because we know that we cannot fulfill the mission that we have in terms of America's foreign policy and all of its manifestations unless we take women into consideration as we're trying to address these issues and seek out the very best possibilities. So let me briefly describe some of our priorities. First, there is a mountain of data today that shows that women are absolutely critical drivers of economic growth. Whether the data and research comes from the United Nations, from the World Bank, from the major corporations, from think tanks, and so many more, there is proven data of a direct correlation between investments in women with positive outcomes in poverty alleviation and the general prosperity of countries. The World Economic Forum does an annual gender gap report. Now, the World Economic Forum is not known as a women's organization. It has some of the top business representation in the world in its ranks. And it annually looks at the gap between men and women in a given country based on 4 measures: health and survivability, educational attainment, economic empowerment and participation, and political empowerment and participation. And what we find is that in those countries where that gap is closest to being closed, those countries are far more prosperous and far more economically competitive. Now, I can tell you as I stand here that in no country, on those 4 measures anyway, is that gap closed. But those who are doing so much better are those in which men and women are participating more fully. Now, over the years, we've seen that the gap is closest to being closed when it comes to health and education. Economic participation is not doing as well as it should. And at the bottom of that effort is political empowerment. Similarly, we know from research that women run small and medium-sized businesses, the SMEs, are the engines of economic growth. As one of the top CEOs has said, they are like the lowest hanging fruit to pick to grow GDP because they are drivers of GDP. Yet around the world, women confront enormous barriers to growing small and medium-sized businesses. Access to training, access to mentoring, to technology, to especially to finance. And what we have been doing is looking at ways in which we can help them overcome these barriers, because the emerging markets are absolutely critical, not just to America's success, as critical as that is, since upwards of 87% of economic growth is going to come outside the United States, and we to be able to sell our products and services around the world. But the vitality, the economic vitality of countries is also critical to our own posture in the world. And so investing in women's economic participation, in their ability to contribute to the growth of economies, is in our interest. And we have been doing this through many of our multilateral platforms, like APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, or AGOA, the Africa Growth Opportunity Group, or OECD, and so many others. We recently, in APEC, which Japan has been leading this year and the United States is about to lead, President Obama attended the meeting most recently in Japan last week. For the first time ever, we brought together high-level government participants with private sector participants to focus on women's entrepreneurship, and intend, as the United States took the baton to run APEC next year, that this will be a major area of consideration. And part of what motivates it is the recognition, for example, that in the Asia-Pacific region, it is estimated that over 40 billion, between 42 and 46 billion dollars annually in GDP is lost because the potential of women is not tapped. So those are the kinds of numbers we're talking about, and that's why we're so focused on women and economic growth. Secondly, we are investing in women in ways that are central to many of the development initiatives that this administration has put forward. Commitment to strengthening the world's food supply by enhancing agriculture productivity. Now, in order to do that, farmers need to be able to work in a way that is going to bring better outcomes to what they do. 70% of the world's farmers are women. They harvest the crops, they store them, they bring them to table. They are the vested players in growing the food of the world. Yet, much of the time, food policy is not directed on women at all. So we need to look at both men's roles in agriculture and women's roles. They are not always the same. Women have needs focusing on their decision-making, the kind of crops they plant, the kind of access to credit they have, access to technology, and particularly land tenure rights, which are a very critical element in their productivity. This is true in the kind of investments we're making in climate change as well as in global health, which is another major administration commitment to improve health and strengthen health systems worldwide, and is focused on a women-centered model of care because, one, their needs are very severe, but because women do care for not just their own families, but for the wider community. So the goals are to reduce maternal and child mortality, which is a very significant challenge in many parts of the world, as well as to ensure more adequate availability of family planning, and also to be able to continue to make the kind of investments this country has been making in combating infectious diseases, particularly in HIV/AIDS. You know, HIV/AIDS is a disease, unfortunately, that increasingly has the face of a woman. And as we are able to provide antiretrovirals to keep more people alive, the alarming rate of increases continues on the other hand. And much of that today is among adolescent girls, many of whom are victims of violence. So there's a great deal that needs to be done in terms of prevention. And then much of this is buttressed by the need to provide more integrated systems of health care, which is something that is a major priority. So economic growth, development initiatives that have a key gender lens on them to ensure that outcomes will be effective.